Mumbai. And also, so this program is thanks to the Italian Cultural Center here in Mumbai and the Ministry of External Affairs, the government of Italy, the Ambasciata d'Italia, the Embassy of Italy, and also the Consulate General here in Mumbai. Of course, the CSMVS, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya in Mumbai, to thank, and to Reshma for enriching our lives with these wonderful examples of world art, though they are placed and positioned in Italy at the moment, which has been a very, very ancient and the heart of civilization, so to speak. So Reshma Nair, I'd like you to begin with giving us first a title of your talk, to put it in establishing the talk, and then please, the floor is yours, and we look forward.
So the title is very simple. It's Antonio del Pollaiuolo's Tomb of Pope Sixtus IV. I'll share my screen, turn on the slideshow. The first slide has the title, and that should make it easier. I usually forget to do this, so just one moment. Okay. Can you just confirm, Anupam, you can see
yes,
my
we can see
screen?
it. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. I keep forgetting how to move this.
This is perfect, actually.
Okay.
Nafisa, thank you. Thank you for joining us, Nafisa. Right.
Okay. The image you're looking at is just a detail of the much larger tomb. We'll look at the image. We'll look at images of the entire tomb shortly. Before we even get there, there are a couple of things I'd like to just lay out. First of all, the sculptor, Antonio del Pollaiuolo. Now, there were two brothers, Antonio and Piero. Their father had a poultry business. Okay, so the word Pollaiuolo means poulterer. So they were Antonio and Piero of the poulterer. So the del Pollaiuolo, which has stuck to them as a name, actually refers to the profession of their father. For the purpose of this talk, when I say Pollaiuolo, I am referring to Antonio del Pollaiuolo. And sometimes you may see references to him simply as Antonio or Antonio Pollaiuolo. It's basically the same artist. Just let me write it out in Hindi. One moment. So this is an approximate, because it's not possible to do a perfect sound in Hindi. Pollai. Sort of an oo sound. So Pollaiuolo. Okay, that would be how it's pronounced. Now, Sixtus IV was a pope who reigned from 1483 to I'm sorry, he died in 1484. Okay, so this tomb was completed in 1493. Sixtus IV is the pope after whom the Sistine Chapel is named. I had spoken about him in one of the earlier lectures in this series on Perugino's Christ handing the keys to Saint Peter. So Perugino was a very well-known painter in Italy, and the Pope had called him to Florence to decorate a chapel at St. Peter's, was very pleased with Perugino's work, and commissioned him and other artists to decorate the walls of the Sistine ceiling. The walls of the Sistine Chapel. What's really interesting and can be a little confusing is that Sixtus IV, the Pope whose tomb I'm going to be talking about today, had a nephew who became Pope a little later and took the name Julius II. Julius II, the nephew of this Pope, was the one who called Michelangelo to paint the Sistine ceiling. Okay, so both Sixtus IV and his nephew were popes. Both of them were from family called della Rovere. That name is important, and we'll come to why in just a moment. And both of them were great patrons of the art. Now, as I mentioned, Sixtus IV's family name was della Rovere. So before he became Pope, let me also just say something which may seem very general, but is important. If you think of the current Pope, Pope Francis, his name is actually Jorge Bergoglio. But as Pope, he has taken the name Francis. Since there was no Pope Francis before him, he becomes Francis I. So when Cardinal Francesco della Rovere became Pope, he took the name Sixtus. There had been 3 popes called Sixtus before him, so he became Sixtus IV. Okay. Now, the figure that you see on screen right now, so you see a female figure in classical drapery, reclining, and in her left hand, she holds 2 things. One of them is an instrument called an astrolabe, and the other is a branch of oak leaves. Very important, because the family name della Rovere, Rovere means oak. So when on any of the commissions of Pope Sixtus IV or his nephew Julius II, you see oak leaves and oak branches or an oak tree, you know it is a reference to the patron's coat of arms. And that's what you see in this specific image. One other small stylistic point I'd like you to note is the positioning of the left leg of this figure. Okay? So note how this curve echoes the form of the monument itself, where the part of the monument where it's placed. You see a lot of this happening, and it's really important in order to notice these details in order to appreciate the overall composition and the thought that has gone into creating this massive work. Now, let me just show you an image very quickly of the entire tomb. So what you see on the right over here is an image viewed from top. So this is not how you would see it if you were standing. It's obviously the photographer has raised himself to get the entire image. It's enormous. Okay, so you could consider the image of the recumbent Pope in the center, more or less life-size. So that will give you a sense of how large the entire tomb is. We'll come back to that. Now, let me just go over. This is in the center, you see the interior of the Sistine Chapel, a contemporary photograph. You see the College of Cardinals over there. And on the lower left, you see a frescoed panel, which would appear somewhere to the right beyond the part that's visible in the central photograph of the most famous painting by Perugino in the chapel. This was commissioned. These panels, these fresco panels on the side walls were commissioned by Pope Sixtus IV. Okay, and several decades later, his nephew was elected Pope, and Pope Julius II commissioned Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Having come to establish the connection between Pope Sixtus IV and Pope Julius II, now let's just look at an image of the Pope with some of his other nephews. He had several nephews. He was infamous for enriching them through church offices and encouraging nepotism, as it were. Okay, so in this fresco, you see the Pope seated at right. In front of him, you have the humanist Bartolomeo Platina, who was appointed the librarian by Sixtus IV. Sixtus IV was also instrumental in opening the Vatican library to the public. Okay, and the remaining figures, the 4 standing figures, are all nephews of the Pope. So they include Giuliano della Rovere, who would eventually commission the tomb that we're going to talk about today. And he would, after that, also be elected Pope and take the name Julius II. The image of the tomb that you see at right has a very clear composition. There is a central panel on which you have the effigy of the deceased. That's Pope Julius I beg your pardon, Pope Sixtus IV. He is dressed in his papal robes. He wears also the papal tiara. Let me just zoom in on that. So this three-tiered hat that the Pope is wearing is the papal tiara. In the papal coat of arms, the appearance of the papal tiara and the crossed keys are a symbol of the papacy. And each individual pope would have their family coat of arms beneath that to personalize it. So for the papacy of Sixtus IV, you have the papal coat of arms, that's the crossed keys, with the oak tree of the Della Rovere family. Okay. Now, at the lower left, you see the coat of arms of the nephew of Sixtus IV. So that's Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere. You see also the oak tree and the cardinal's hat above that. And that appears also on the tomb. Just one moment. So here, these two identical coats of arms over here, the oak tree with the cardinal's hat, are the coat of arms of the patron of this tomb, the nephew of the deceased pope, Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere. On the top, these two panels are the papal coat of arms, so the coat of arms of the deceased pope, and they are actually upside down. And there's a very simple reason for that. Okay, there's no crazy reason. The reason is, being a freestanding tomb, this was placed or meant to be placed in a manner where those entering the room where it was placed in the center of the room would approach it from the rear. Okay, so walking towards the tomb, the first thing you would see would be the Pope's head. Okay? And when you were looking at that, the papal coat of arms over here would be oriented correctly. If that's confusing for the moment, just leave it aside. It should become clearer as we look at other images. On the right, we have a plan of St. Peter's as it was during the pontificate of Pope Sixtus IV. It's important to note that the church you see today, the Church of St. Peter's in Rome, is called New St. Peter's because it was built, and the impetus for that building, the final important push, came from Pope Julius II, the nephew of Sixtus IV. So this old basilica was demolished, and what is currently New St. Peter's was built in its place. But during the lifetime of Sixtus IV, this is the ground plan of St. Peter's. We refer to it as Old St. Peter's. And within Old St. Peter's, this area, this chapel, had been earmarked by Sixtus IV for his tomb. So he had planned for it before he passed away, and he wanted it to be placed in this chapel. It was called the Chapel of the Canon's Coil. And in the image on the left, you see the number 67. So that marks the location of the tomb, the original location of the tomb. Now, let me just erase this one moment. when you enter this chapel, okay, the way the tomb was supposed to have been placed, the first thing you would see would be, would be the image that you see on the left. Okay, so let me just assume you were entering from behind these curtains. You enter the room, okay, and you would see basically this area that I've marked out in yellow. So this is what you would see. And when you look at this part of it, just to the left and right would be the papal coat of arms of Sixtus IV that would be oriented correctly to your gaze. The dimensions, absolutely enormous. These are approximate dimensions. The are actually a little more. So it's about 2.5 feet high, about, let's say, 11 feet wide, long, and about 12, 9, 10, about 10 feet, 9 or 10 feet wide. Okay, so absolutely enormous. Now, if you notice the shape of the tomb, right? Essentially, you have the recumbent figure of the Pope. Beyond that, you have, you could say, a frame with sculpted, low relief sculpted figures, and the what I'm calling the frame and the effigy of the Pope themselves are raised on a sculpted pedestal or base. Okay, that makes roughly the shape of the tomb. A few details to appreciate the exquisite workmanship of Pollaiuolo. So let me just zoom in. Double pillows, tassels, embroidery, and if you look at whatever this mattress or bed is supposed to be, it appears to be draped with a covering that has that is woven, and it has tassels at the end, and you can see just how exquisite the detailing is. Let me the images of the face, the portrait of the deceased. Okay, the best image I've seen is the one on the right, and I highly recommend this video that's on YouTube. It's a short video, less than 10 minutes, but it has some of the best images of the tomb. I mean, it's head and shoulders above most of the other images, and because it's a video, you actually get to see the camera over the details, and you're able to appreciate it better. So just note how fluid the composition is, how three-dimensional the head is. This is, even though it represents the deceased Pope and was probably made from a mask, it conveys, ironically, the vitality of the deceased. Okay. And on the image at lower right, you can just see the edges of the panels with the coat of arms of the Pope. And I hope it's clear now what I meant by when I said that those are upside down, but they're correctly oriented to the view of a person who would have entered the room where this tomb was placed as originally planned. One other point to note, there's a panel here. It has a personification of charity, caritas. I'll come to it later, but just remember that this is also oriented to the gaze of a viewer approaching the tomb from this direction. Okay. A detail from the coat of arms. So this is absolutely a stunning, stunning image. So the same coat of arms that you can barely see on the left and right, and which are oriented in the opposite direction from the portrait of the deceased, you see the papal tiara and one of the keys, and you can see the level of detail, the extraordinary beauty of Pollaiuolo's metalwork. Okay, the panel of charity. Okay, now charity is one of three theological virtues. Okay, so faith, hope, and charity. And charity is usually depicted with children, and one of the children is an infant suckling at her breast. So this is a standard depiction of charity. In any case, all the figures that are depicted on this tomb are labeled. So there is no confusion as to what is depicted. If you look at this part, so this image doesn't show you clearly, but there are little tablets with inscriptions naming the figures. So this one would say caritas, okay, for charity. Two different views. Now, I spoke about the figure of the Pope in the center, and the coat of arms on the upper left and right, and the coat of arms at lower left and right. So on the upper part, the two coats of arms are reversed, and or rather they're upside down, and they're the coat of arms of the deceased Pope. In the lower part, they are the coat of arms of the deceased Pope's cardinal nephew, Giuliano della Rovere. There is an inscription, a rather lengthy inscription, that says that Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere had this tomb built for his uncle, Pope Sixtus IV. Behind the Pope's head, the panel we just looked at is the panel of charity. I told you charity was one of three theological virtues. The other two, faith and hope, appear to the left and right of Sixtus's shoulder and chest area. Okay? The remaining four figures that you see are the four cardinal virtues. So justice, prudence, temperance, and we'll look at details in a moment. I just want to give you a sense of what all appears where on this tomb. Now, on the base, this curved base, so you can see on the upper left, when you look at the edges, these very steep curves, there are personifications that are placed along the long and the short edges. So basically all around the tomb. There are two each on the short edges, and there are three each on the long edges. Amongst the figures that are on these curved, what I'm going to call the base panels, are personifications of the liberal arts. Now, in the tradition of papal tombs, right, this tomb was unusual not just for its shape, not just because it was a freestanding tomb instead of being a wall tomb, but it was also very unusual for its depiction of 10 personifications of the arts. There were other tombs in which the personifications of the arts had appeared, but usually in papal tombs, you would have more religious imagery. So the theological virtues were often found, the cardinal virtues were often found, images of Christ and the Virgin, saints, all of that. But to have personifications of the liberal arts seemed out of place. Okay? And they were I think it would be fair to say it was not easily understood. Okay, there are contemporary chronicles that say it's very beautiful, but it's difficult to understand. Okay, now as we go through the talk, I'll refer to certain specific anecdotes that I hope will help us understand a little better how they're appropriate and why they might have been selected for this tomb. What Sixtus's reasoning would have been, or rather, what Giuliano della Rovere's reasoning would have been to decorate his uncle's tomb with these figures. Okay, a quick recap of the schema of this tomb. So you have the effigy of the Pope in the center. All the yellow arrows simply tell you the direction in which the imagery is correctly viewed. So very simple, the images on the right side are correctly viewed when you're standing with your back to the right and looking head on. Similar thing for the left side. And we've already seen for this last bit and for the base images, you have to be walking towards the tomb from the rear for the imagery to be oriented correctly. Okay. The faith, hope, and charity are the three theological virtues often found on all kinds of tombs, including papal tombs. Prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice, the four cardinal virtues, often found along with faith, hope, and charity. So you might have only the three theological virtues, you may have all seven virtues, and they were often found on tombs. Humanist tombs sometimes even had the three graces or other personifications, but they always had what is called a moralized meaning. So they were adapted to Christian theology. Now, when it comes to the personifications of the liberal arts, so the 10 figures on the base, there was a standard set of three that was called the Trivium, okay? And that's rhetoric, grammar, and logic, the basics of an education, right? You need it at the time. And the Quadrivium, which was arithmetic, astrology, geometry, and music. So these were, you could say, standard disciplines. But on this tomb, you have the addition of three others, the ones I've marked in yellow text: philosophy, theology, and perspectiva. I have translated it as optics and not perspective for a simple reason, because usually in the context of the Renaissance, when we use the word perspective, we tend to think of linear perspective, of the arrangement on a picture plane of objects in a manner that represents recession into space. But in this case, it has a much, much broader meaning. It has to do with the optics and measurement and the study of, let me not say a study, a mathematical / philosophical discipline. Okay, so that's why I've translated it as optics rather than perspective. But it would not be wrong to say, call the figure perspective. And you might see references to that too. Okay. Now coming to the artist. Okay. Antonio del Pollaiuolo was trained as a goldsmith, and his brother was a painter. Okay, so they both sculpted and painted, but Antonio was most proficient at sculpting, and Piero was not better than Antonio, but better at painting than at sculpting. Okay. On the left is the bronze sculpture of the Kathleen Shivels. This is an Etruscan sculpture, and it is widely believed that the addition of the twins Remus and Romulus was done by Antonio del Pollaiuolo. So accomplished sculptor and engraver. The prints, the engraving you're looking at on the right is a very well-known work by Antonio del Pollaiuolo, and it's called the Battle of 10 Nudes. Okay, it doesn't have a topic as such. It is more a figure study. So this is Pollaiuolo creating, in a way, a showpiece which explains all that he can do, how proficient he is at depicting the human body. What's important to note for the purpose of our talk are the two central figures. So this figure and this figure. And if you look at them, they are not mirror images of each other, but they are almost as if the same figure has been pivoted. So if you look at the figure on the left, the one he has his right hand raised, he holds a sword, his left leg is forward. And if you were to rotate the figure on its axis and move it to the right, you'd get the figure on the right, okay? More or less. And this is quite a common feature in Antonio del Pollaiuolo's paintings and engravings and drawings. His study of the human figure, the movement of the human figure, and the positioning of the human figure by means of rotating a model, by pivoting a model and approaching it from different angles is really important to the development of both painting and sculpture in the Renaissance. And we will see in the tomb of Sixtus IV how Pollaiuolo uses this kind of composition. So taking one basic figure, sometimes mirroring it, sometimes pivoting it, and always adding changes to give it variety and make it look organic. So instead of looking like, here's A, here's a reflection of A, or here's B, and here's a pivoted version of B that becomes C, they appear to be individualized organic figures. So now let's look at the details. So at the side, at the foot end of the tomb, the two figures you see here and the one you see in the left corner form the trivium. Okay, so grammar, rhetoric, and logic or dialectic. Oops, I made a mistake. I need to cover something else first before we get to those figures. I told you that Pope Sixtus's tomb, the freestanding tomb, was drastically new. Okay. There was something similar, not a freestanding tomb, but what's called a tomb slab or a slab tomb, okay, which was placed at floor level. And that had been in use. On the right, you have one such slab for the painter Fra Angelico. Okay, he's buried in the church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva in Rome. And on the left, you have a similar slab, but in bronze, for the Pope Martin V from the Colonna family. And this is also in Rome, in the Cathedral of Rome, San Giovanni in Laterano. You will notice that in both these tombs, the effigy of the deceased, the portrait of the deceased, is in low relief. Okay, so the details do not project much. Whereas when you compare it with the tomb of Sixtus IV, even if it has, let's say, try to develop the tradition of the floor type of tomb, it has gone above and beyond to create what is truly a freestanding monument. It is like three-dimensional sculpture, which is meant to be viewed in the round. Okay. How exactly might this type of sculpture tomb have been conceived of? Well, the Pope's nephew, Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, had on one of his official appointments traveled to France, to Avignon, possibly to Paris, and in Northern Europe, especially in France, it was tradition for royalty to be commemorated, to be buried in these kind of tombs. Here you see probably the largest collection of French royal tombs at Saint-Denis in Paris. And you'll note that they're all on raised sarcophagi shaped bases, and they have very high relief effigies of the deceased. Okay? So if the Pope's nephew saw these and was influenced by these, and then decided to have his uncle's tomb created in this mode, that would explain the sudden appearance of a totally new type. One of the points I'd like to make before going forward is that in northern freestanding tombs like these, very often, not in the images that you see here, but very often you would have on the base, so these areas would be decorated with maybe relief sculpture of what are called pleurant figures, figures that are mourning, in mourning. Okay? And often these could be the theological virtues, the cardinal virtues, or just often female figures mourning. Okay? I'll come back to that a little. Now, the image you're looking at right now is, you could say, typical of the type of the walled tomb, the Renaissance walled tomb. So this is in the baptistry of, in the Florentine baptistry. And on the right, you have the detail of the deceased. This is Baldassare Costa, who for a while was Pope John the 23rd, but then he was stripped of that title. And in this tomb, so this tomb is enormous. It has multiple levels. So above the effigy of the Pope, you have the Virgin and Child. And this is quite normal to have the Virgin and Child, or Christ and other saints on a tomb. Okay. Just below that, you have this inscription, and you have two mournful putti, or angels rather. Okay. Below that, there's a relief register, and at the lowest figured level, you have three niches with three female figures, the three theological virtues. So this is a very standard type of tomb. And if you think about a tomb where you have an effigy of the deceased, you have the three theological virtues, you have the Virgin and Christ, and it's set against a wall. That's the kind of tomb you would expect to have been built by any of the popes. But in the case of Sixtus IV, we have this extraordinary monument. So the inscription tells us a little about it, but we need to read between the lines. So as you will see, this inscription is placed between the coat of arms of the patron, that's Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere. And he says to Pope Sixtus IV of the because Sixtus IV was a Franciscan. He was elected the Father General of the Franciscan Order. He was made a cardinal, and then he was elected Pope. Okay? So, Prince of all memory for his learning and greatness of spirit, who endowed Rome with churches and opened the Vatican library to the public. And though he had given orders, so though the Pope, Sixtus IV, had given orders to be buried modestly and on level ground, Cardinal Giulio, that's the patron, the nephew, erected this tomb to his uncle of blessed memory with greater piety than expense. Okay, so here's the patron explaining away this lavish, extraordinary, self-aggrandizing monument by saying that it is a symbol of piety more than the amount that has been spent on it. Okay, now we come to the theological virtues. Okay, as I mentioned, the personification of charity is actually upside down. I've just put it the right side up, but it would be placed in a manner oriented to the view of a person approaching it from the back. Okay, so you have Charity with the child suckling at her breast. Faith, very easily identifiable by the cross, and she holds also the chalice, and hope in an attitude of prayer. So these three figures usually go together and have a specific type of iconography, very easily identifiable. I made a mistake earlier. I mentioned that this tablet says charity. I take that back. I don't know what it says. Okay, it is the figures on the base, the 10 liberal arts that have their identification, their names on the tablets. The 7 figures that appear on the frame are all easily identifiable. It's the 3 theological virtues and the 4 cardinal virtues. They don't need the any kind of inscription. So let's start at lower right. Justice holds the sword, okay? And above her, you have a figure. Let me just zoom in on that. She holds 2 vessels, okay? And in her right hand, she's pouring a liquid, that's wine, into, or rather water. She's pouring it into this other vessel with wine in it. So she's tempering the wine with water, temperance. This figure holding a mirror, just a mirror, is likely to be a symbol of vanity or pride, but it is coupled with a serpent. And this references biblical verse. I don't remember which one exactly, but where Christ says, he equates, or rather he says something like the wisdom of serpents. Okay, so this combination of the mirror and the serpent tell you that this figure is prudence. And lastly, the seated figure at lower left holds a scepter, and she places her left elbow on a column. The column and the scepter are symbols, attributes of fortitude or strength. So even though there are no identifying tablets or labels and inscriptions, it's very clear that the figures here, I'm sorry, let me just go back here. The figures, the 7 figures surrounding the Pope are the 3 theological virtues and the 4 cardinal virtues. Okay. Now these 3 figures. So we have grammar, rhetoric, and logic. I'm talking about figures. First of all, I want you to just look at what, oh, actually, I think we can read the labels, at least in this one. Dialectica. Okay, so that's logic. She has a scorpion, that's a standard attribute, and there are the inscriptions here are taken from texts that are easily recognizable and very make it very simple to accept the that it's a depiction of dialectic or logic. Look at what she's holding in her right hand, a very specific type of branch, the same kind of branch that the figure of grammar. I'm sorry, this is grammar. This must be rhetoric. Rhetoric is holding in her left hand. So it's the oak branch. It's the symbol of the Della Rovere family. The family of the deceased Pope and of the Cardinal Virtues who commissioned the monument. So these are the identifying inscribed tablets, and the two books that you see over here have inscriptions that identify them as grammar books. So these are children learning grammar. Okay? This is rhetoric and this is logic. The quadrivium, the set of 4 sciences or disciplines, arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and music, are also a standard set of liberal arts. So the 7 liberal arts canonically have the trivium and the quadrivium. Okay? So on the top left, you have arithmetic. She holds a slate over here and she's working out an equation or a problem. Over here on the right, this figure represents astronomy. She holds an a word right now, it's armillary sphere. Okay, so the position of the planets, she's calculating that, or she's working them out. And these bands that you see at upper right, there are 9 of them. These have to be a reference to the planets. The figure here, I don't have a good detail of this, but what she's doing is she's holding a compass, okay? And in better images, you can see that what she's drawing is something like it's a circle with 2 equilateral triangles. And you can read on the book here excerpts from Euclid's geometry about a problem that she is solving. She's working it out. So as I mentioned, all these figures are clearly labeled, and their attributes and inscriptions are very clear and tell you what they are. Now, the image of music, I was lucky enough to find a very clear image. So we'll look at a close-up of that. Let me just go there. So labeled very clearly, musica, and it's a personification of music, a female figure in classical drapery, just like the other figures. And I want you to notice her hands, just how delicately and beautifully they have been sculpted. And notice also what's happening on the base of this organ. You see here very clearly the coat of arms of the Della Rovere family, the oak trees. And you see the same oak tree surmounted by the papal tiara and the crossed keys. Okay? It looks to me, I'm not 100% sure of this, but it looks to me that at the base here, you have the cardinal's hat. That would be a reference to the patron, Giuliano della Rovere. And this would be a reference to the deceased, Sixtus IV. Let me just go back a moment to this image. Okay. So if you look over here, this portion that's sticking out, right? Let me just erase the... So this part is likely the base. I think it is the base of the musical organ. Now, think about the shape of the tomb itself. Okay? I mentioned with the first slide how the curve of the leg mirrors the curve of the panel or the base of the tomb itself. Think about how this base of the organ reprises the shape of the entire monument, the base of the entire monument. So there are multiple references within these images, and these are just the most obvious. The point I want to make is actually more complex. And I don't have details because it's so complex. When we look at the images here, I don't have better details. Just one moment. These images that have, oops, my pointer's disappeared. Okay. Open books that have been inscribed. Okay. These inscriptions can be read, and the inscriptions are rarely straightforward, that they're just taken from an easily identifiable work. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they are slightly adapted because they are used to convey something more than just the obvious. Okay? And those meanings are usually connected to theology. So, theologian, he was very interested in the Immaculate Conception. He had written, he had authored an argument for it because the Franciscans and the Dominicans were disputing it. And there are references in these images of the liberal arts to theological issues. Okay? And all of that make them appropriate for the tomb of a pope. Now, if you think back to when I told you about the French tombs, that often the northern tombs, the freestanding tombs, have mourning figures on the base. On the base of Sixtus's tomb, let me just, yeah, oops. These figures are not mourning figures, okay? But they are placed where in northern tombs you might often find mourning figures, but their attributes and the details in each of the panels have multiple references, not just the coat of arms of Sixtus, the family of Sixtus, but other references to theological issues he had written about, that he propagated, or I should say supported. And to understand all that requires a lot more than I can't do that. You would need a theologian to explain it to you. The point I want to make is that these images, which were not easily understood even by contemporary viewers, were not understood because they were unusual. Nobody really expected to see the liberal arts on the base of a papal tomb. But they needed much more interpretation than just identifying attributes, identifying a figure. Okay? It needed viewers to be aware of theological issues of the day, Sixtus's writings, Franciscan theology, all of that, to get a fuller understanding of the meaning of the figures. Okay. Now, these are the three additional figures. So let me just go back to where I have the schema. We've gone over the effigy of the Pope, the three theological virtues, the four cardinal virtues, the trivium in blue, the quadrivium in green, and that leaves us with these three in yellow, okay, which also fit into the liberal arts, but they're not the canonical. The canonical liberal arts are the trivium and the quadrivium, so 7 total, 3 plus 4. Okay, these additional 3 that you have, I see we're over time, so I'll get through it quickly. These additional 3 panels have meanings that reference, just like their other counterparts, theological issues that Sixtus was involved in. Now, very quickly, Optics, I told you, perspective or optics on the upper left has the astrolabe, which is for calculations. So it is beyond just linear perspective. The book that is open here, one of the lines, perhaps the first line that's visible, says something like, without light, nothing is visible. Now, that seems like a rather obvious thing to say, but keep in mind a Christian reading of that. Christ is compared to light. So without light, without Christ in your life, nothing is visible. Life is not worthwhile. Okay, so there is that meaning also. At the lower left, you have theology, and you can see here in this unusual, not very unusual, but rather unusual representation of a three-headed person in the sun. And I won't go into detail on this right now, but I will say that there is further meaning over here, because this figure of theology reprises the type of the goddess Diana, so pagan goddess, but who was in works like the Ovid Moralize. She was, Christian meaning was given to Ovidian myths, and she is associated with the moon. So here you have the Trinity in the sun. There are other writings that associate the church with the moon, reflecting the light of the Trinity or the sun. So there is all of that that adds to the meaning of this panel. And the last one over here is philosophy, about which I don't really have much to say, but I would just like to show you one detail which might or might not have further meaning. So this eagle that you see here, right? It here you can actually read the tablet, Philosophia. The eagle that you see here might have an imperial reference, because there's a lot of literature on this tomb as to how it is not the typical papal religious kind of tomb that you would expect. And Sixtus was also noted as being one of the first Pope kings. Okay, so being more interested in secular, or I won't say more interested, very interested in secular power as much as religious power. Okay, just one moment. So, Anupam, I'm just going to ask you, do I have a couple of minutes, or should I stop here?
Do take a couple of minutes, Rish. Okay. Absolutely.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I went over time. Okay, so this is literally the last point I want to make, but I think it's really helpful. I mentioned that the tomb, the original location of the tomb, before Old St. Peter's was torn down, was in the center of this room. Okay, now the bronze tomb monument took many years, almost 10 years, to be sculpted. In the meantime, Sixtus's body had been buried in the chapel. It had been buried more or less where the tomb is, and it had been buried with the head facing the 67 and the feet facing the 69 and 68. This is a really important point, because also in this chapel, you see the semicircular area, it was the apse of the chapel. Okay, so that's the if you think of cut an orange into a quarter and take out the orange and you just have the peel, that would be the shape of the roof of this area, the ceiling of this area. Okay, and inside that was a painting by Perugino, okay, of the Virgin and Child, Saints Peter and Paul, and Saint Peter presenting Sixtus IV to the Virgin. And along with these figures, there were also two Franciscan saints. Saint Francis, the founder of the Franciscan order, to which Sixtus IV belonged and which Sixtus IV headed before he was elected cardinal and pope. and Saint Anthony of Padua, another Franciscan saint. So with the placement of the tomb in this room, okay, in this chapel, in this manner, this is just to give you an idea, you would have Sixtus, the monument, and the ceiling of this area, all, if you consider it one space, one integrated space, you have, even though you don't have Christ and the Virgin depicted on the tomb, you don't have overtly religious imagery other than the appearance of the virtues. You have a space in which this monument forms part of an ensemble along with that apse fresco by Perugino, making the tomb more than just a standalone monument. I really feel it needs to be understood as, in its original context, as having been part of an ensemble in which it responded to the apse fresco. So with that, I finish, and I'm happy to take questions now. I'll keep the slideshow on because if there are questions, it's easier for me to just go back and forth.
Thank you very much, Reshma. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to ask your questions. What a delightful object that you chose.
It's
really
stunning.
Delightful. How beautiful.
So beautiful.
Even the quality of the bronze itself to the workmanship, really. Thank you, Reshma. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, any questions, please? Yes, the questions are coming in, Reshma.
Sure.
Nupur is asking where the tomb located today.
Okay, good question. So it is in St. Peter's. I see contradictory information, Vatican Grottoes and the Treasury of St. Peter, and I'm not 100% sure where, because I have been to the Vatican Grottoes and I do not remember this tomb because you cannot forget if you've seen it. I have not been to the Treasury of St. Peter, but it's also possible they're the same. And when I went, this was being renovated. So it's in St. Peter's somewhere. It's enormous.
And Shibu asks that, in fact, before that, I'll go to the shorter one where Adil asks that, is music written as musica with the A within the C?
Yeah, there are a lot of abbreviations, and Latin has its own conventions. So I assume that's one of the conventions. I don't know why.
Okay, and then related was that, are the 10 images on the lower pedestal labeled in the small rectangular blocks next to the figures displayed on these panels?
So I'm not sure I understand. The 10 liberal arts are on the curved base area. Okay, those all have the tablets with their inscribed names. Okay. The virtues over here don't have them, but they are. It's so clear who they are. There's no confusion. If the question is different, then I need to be asked again because I didn't get it.
Adil, it'll be better if you ask it directly, please.
Well, actually, I had asked the question when it was not mentioned in the talk earlier. So it's answered now.
Okay. Okay, but we'll get to this, Adil, later after this. Shibu asks that, so Reshma, theology and charity were shown in different colors, right?
Okay, so
any significance, Shibu's asking.
Let me be honest about this. I don't think there's a significance, but also I should say that the different colors, it's very difficult to get images of this work. Okay, so there are excellent images available. I just don't have the right to use them, so I've not used them. Okay. For instance, if you look at the two images here, it's the same work, photographs, the colors look different. So I am inclined to think the coloring of almost everything on the tomb is standard. It's just that when you see details by different photographers, the color looks different. So I don't think coloring has any significance as such, because I don't think there's a difference in coloring. But that said, I haven't seen the tomb myself, and the photographs I'm relying on are not the best when it comes to color. So I can't say. I will just say, I'll repeat this if anybody wants to note it down very quickly. Rome reports, if you do a search on YouTube for Rome reports spectacular papal tomb, you'll see a video which I think would be relatively one of the best in terms of color, to give you a sense of what it looks like.
And Reshma, I'll just take one more question.
Sure.
Just one more question, and that is, did Pope Julius intend his tomb sculpted by Michelangelo to be placed in the same location?
No. So I'll just tell you very quickly. Let me get to that. So Julius II was instrumental in tearing down old St. Peter's and building new St. Peter's. Okay, but there was, yeah. So roughly, let me just. So in Old St. Peter's, because what we're looking at on the right is a plan of Old St. Peter's. This is the crossing of the church. New St. Peter's, the crossing is more or less in the same area. It was in the crossing of New St. Peter's that Julius II intended his tomb to be. So a much, much more prominent, a very prominent in the basilica, whereas Sixtus's tomb is over here.
And Reshma, is this the first high relief tomb in Italy? Nupur Roy asks.
First high relief. So
It's
high
first one in
relief
the round
simply means it's the projection from the base is a lot. So let me just go to this image here. Yeah. So this is a freestanding tomb. Okay? Freestanding means it's not attached to a wall. So this is also high relief. These figures are high relief because they project from the support. So it's high relief, but it's not freestanding because it's placed against a wall. So whether it's the first freestanding tomb in Italy, I don't know, because I do know in Milan there is something in Sant'Ambrogio, which I'm thinking were medieval tombs which were freestanding. So I don't think it'd be accurate to say it was the first freestanding tomb. It's the first papal freestanding papal tomb.
All right. Thank you very much, Reshma.
Most welcome.
Thank you very much. And with the kind permission of all the ladies and gentlemen attending this today, may I request that we close the session this evening, and we look forward to the next one. What is it that you're regaling us with next?
Well, a painting that's extremely beautiful, this Saint Job altarpiece. So Venice, we'll be going to Venice.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Reshma, as always. Look
Thank
after
you very
yourself.
much.
Have a lovely week. Oh yes, are we meeting after the new year? So
yes, I think
good.
that second week of January probably.
Have a happy transition to the new year. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, lady. Thank you, Samiksha. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.